conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
Stand up!
When the story gets twisted, who's going to tell the truth? When they cut the microphones, who's still talking? When history gets rewritten, who remembers what really happened? We do. KBLA Talk 1580. Black media isn't just important right now, it's essential. Because when mainstream outlets move on, we stay. When the headlines ignore our communities, we don't. When decisions are being made that affect Black lives in our schools, our neighborhoods, our economy, KBLA is in the room. This is more than radio. This is a lifeline, a record, a rallying cry. Black stories, Black voices, Black power.
The heat is on.
On the air and in the culture. KBLA Talk 1580. Stay connected. Stay informed. Stay loud.
Stand up!
You are listening to the Black Pack here on KBLA Talk 1580. I'm your host, Adrianne Shropshire. And if you all remember last week, I said we were going to start our midterm election coverage, even though we are already in the midterms, which I also continue to say the midterms are not coming in December. They are here right now. And maybe we'll get into some of the elections that we just saw in the last week. But we talked last week with Marcus Bass of North Carolina, partly because there are some states, many in the South, that will in fact determine control of the United States Congress. 5 years ago, you all will remember that the state of Georgia showed up in an amazing way, not only to give Joe Biden a historic win, but also to send two Democratic senators to the United States Senate, Senator John Ossoff and Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock. And then Warnock had to win again, you all will remember. So he had to run again in 2022 for a re-election campaign against Herschel Walker. That went to a runoff, which was both shocking and sad in many ways, that we had to go to a runoff with a candidate such as Herschel Walker, but we did. Senator Warnock won again. And now Senator John Ossoff is up for re-election in 2026. So I am so excited to be joined by Kendra Cotton, the CEO of High Opportunity Voter Project and the High Opportunity Voter Project Action Fund, to talk about what is at stake in Georgia and what it's going to take to repeat getting another Democratic senator across the line. But Georgia also has a governor's race that we are also going to talk about, Kendra, because your primary is coming up soon. And it's a very crowded field on the Democratic side. So one, welcome, and thank you so much for joining to talk about what needs to happen in Georgia.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. No problem. With you today.
So my first question to you is actually what I said, which is, we saw Georgia turn blue or flip in 2020. And then we saw the reelection of Senator Raphael Warnock in 2022. And in some ways, when we think about 2020, there's this sort of mythology, right, that somehow the state just happened to wake up and say millions of voters, and millions of Black voters in particular, are just going to go to the polls today, right? As if it was some miraculous thing, when actually it was a bunch of hard work done by a lot of people over a lot of years. And that work is sustained in some ways. My question to you is, what is it going to take? This is another big year with lots at stake on both sides, right? People will be motivated on both sides. What is it going to take or what does it take generally to win in a state like Georgia?
Yeah. So in a state like Georgia, turnout is everything, right? And I think you just alluded to that. We do have a robust coalition, but it also takes strong candidates. And, despite what a lot of people are thinking about the Senate race right now, let me be clear. John Ossoff is not a given in Georgia. John Ossoff is a United States Senator today because he was on the ticket with Raphael Warnock, who drug him across the finish line. John Ossoff is collectively considered like the caboose of a train here in Georgia. And Warnock has always been that engine that could, okay? And so now we're about to see in this, election cycle, whether John Senator Ossoff can carry an election on his own and be able to lift the fortunes of the other folks who are, further down ballot. So, it's just going to be educating voters. He's got to get out here and talk to voters. It is not enough to be some superstar on Threads and social media and all, be pontificating about all these things on television when you haven't been in your state and in, these 159 counties in a real meaningful way, explaining to folks why you deserve to be reelected.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing some of that. I think we've been doing some focus groups and talking to voters in Georgia, and there is a sense from folks right across the state that they are not that aware of what the senator has been doing, that they haven't seen him, and they want to. Right? It isn't like they like writing him off. Right. But they really do want to. And so some of it is about the work of his campaign. And it's also about the work of independent organizations, right, to help people get the information, right, also in front of others.
Yeah. What we have going for us this time around is that, Georgia took a step in professionalizing its partisan party apparatus on the Democratic side. So we now have, a paid ED. They are now hiring organizers and trying to get them out in the field. It remains to be seen what their reach is going to be. But I think on the, kind of soft side, the independent expenditure side, I think we really are kind of coalescing around a unified plan to get voters out. It's going to take everybody being involved. So this idea that, we alone can do it absent of, national assistance, I think is quite naive. We are going to need all hands on deck in order to bring this thing home. Because I want to be clear, where Georgia is concerned, especially, and I love that you just talked to Marcus last week from Advanced North Carolina, and I lived 16 years in North Carolina. With North Carolina as our neighbor, and given all the Council of State seats that they hold, given that it's looking very good for Roy Cooper there, we've got to do something here in Georgia, or we're going to be Florida.
But it did take literally the kitchen sink to win in 2020, and then also to win in 2022. And that's an important thing for people to know, is that, and when I say it literally took the kitchen sink, it literally took the entire kitchen sink to get those two senators elected, and also the win for Joe Biden. And what that meant is that you had groups on the ground who were operating at a very high level. You had national partners who were operating at a very high level. You had and by the time we got to the runoffs, you all got to the runoffs, there was sort of the only game in town. And so the entire Democratic ecosystem from across the country was only focused on Georgia. And so these wins that we see that are historic wins, they take a lot, and they take a lot from the organizations who are on the ground. So when we come forward, I want to talk with Kendra about her organization, which is new. Although Kendra's not new, her organization is new, and I want to talk about where you all fit in this broader ecosystem to make sure that voters are educated and mobilized for the midterm elections. This is the Black Pack. We have a lot to talk about, Stacey.
You're part of the Black Pack with Adrianne Shropshire on KBLA Talk 1580.
Progressive's accident response can detect and send help when you need it most, after a major car accident. But other accidents, you're on your own. Like when you accidentally call your wife Mom. When you accidentally say Happy Holidays on someone's birthday. When you accidentally wave at someone you thought was waving at you. We can't help with those accidents, but Progressive's accident response provides peace of mind after major car accidents. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Limited availability in California. Driver is responsible for emergency and towing charges not covered by the policy.
Indeed presents hires you can't afford to get wrong, like a staff accountant at the height of tax season.
Congrats. Looks like the company owes, $50 in taxes. How about that?
That seems low. Why only 50?
Why do you care so much? It's not your money.
This is the job for sponsored jobs.
This is what happens when you don't sponsor your job on Indeed. Next time, get matched with quality candidates with Indeed sponsored jobs.
Visit Indeed.com/hire now and sponsor your job today.
Hi, I'm Zoe Williams, host of The Voice of Reason, weeknights at 7 p.m. here on KBLA Talk 1580, with a personal invitation for you to join me and Insight.me as we present The Healing Box, live at Inglewood's world-famous Miracle Theater, Saturday evening, May 23rd at 7 p.m. Look, I understand your attachment style has been running your life like a rogue algorithm, and nobody has had the courage to press pause. Until now, Dr. Pakoya McCall and yours truly are curating a night where clinicians, spiritualists, and an all-star panel of Black woman healers like Dr. Shalonda Sunshine Crawford, Dr. Jashana Johnson, and spiritualist Precious McGill will join some amazing spoken word artists and the legendary comedian Louis Dix to diagnose, disrupt, and heal your relational wreckage in real time. Listen, bring your trauma. As a matter of fact, bring your baby mama. No, bring your testimony. And if you're still texting your ex at 2 a.m., baby, you're not just invited, you're the target demo. Tickets are moving fast, so grab yours at themiracleinglewood.com before your dating history gets flagged as a pre-existing condition. That's themiracleinglewood.com. We'll see you there Saturday, May 23rd at 7 p.m.
Let's get back to more of the Black Pack with Adrianne Shropshire right now on KBLA Talk 1580.
You are listening to the Black Pack, and we are in conversation with Kendra Cotton, the CEO of High Opportunity Voter Project and the High Opportunity Voter Project Action Fund. So, Kendra, I wanted to talk to you a little about, before the break, we were talking about what it takes to win in Georgia. And in many ways, unfortunately, maybe it takes absolutely everything to be able to pull off these historic victories. And that includes organizations on the ground that have the capacity and the skill and the resources to be able to touch voters across the state. How many counties does Georgia have again?
159.
Right, 159 counties where voters have to be mobilized. And for Black voters, there is, we think about Atlanta all the time, or people think about Atlanta all the time, is as if that's the only place where Black voters have to be engaged. But that is not true. And we think about the counties outside of Fulton County where Atlanta is, that is oftentimes where a lot of attention does not go and a lot of resources do not go, but where I know that you all have been spending your time. And so talk a little bit about your organization. Tell us about your organization and where you all fit in the broader ecosystem in Georgia.
Yes, so High Opportunity Voter Project and its sister organization, the High Opportunity Voter Project Action Fund, basically we are trying to be an additive entity in this infrastructure. We have so many groups out here that are doing good work collectively, and we aren't trying to take up space from those groups. But there is a gap here in our state from organizations that are no longer with us. And so HOVP kind of sprung forth from that. And so when you pose the question about like, what is it that we do? Well, I always tell people, the first step is to expand the electorate, and we do that through voter registration. Then you have to educate folks, and so you're talking to people about issues of the heart, things that they consider to be important, and you figure out kind of what that is. Then you engage them on a regular cadence so that things aren't so transactional, because that's what really ticks folks off is that when you have candidates just showing up, on the Sunday before election day, and it's like, hey, vote for me. And you're like, well, who are you? You know what I'm saying? Like, okay. And then the last piece is the mobilization. And so that's where the Action Fund kind of comes in on the C4 side. And that's hitting it home, trying to get as many people to actually take action by going into the voting booth and casting a vote for folks that are going to bring about the policy changes that they want to see manifest here that will make their lives better, the lives of their children better, and so forth and so on.
Well, there's sort of a science to this, right? Of like getting voters to turn out. And I think that we oftentimes, we think about the need to register voters. I think we oftentimes don't understand the scale of how many folks in our communities are still not registered to vote, right? And so on the one hand, you have to solve for the problem of getting those people registered, finding them, getting them registered, making sure that, folks that are turning 18 are getting registered. And then on the other hand, you have to solve for the problem of getting those people who you just registered to actually turn out and vote.
Correct.
Right. And I think that's the part that we struggle with is we also have lots of people who are registered who just simply don't turn out. And I think that what you're saying is that those two challenges that need to be solved are what HOVP and partner organizations will be doing, not when we get to September or October, but is in fact what you all are doing right now.
We're on the doors right now. So Georgia's primary is May 19th. And on that primary ballot are some state Supreme Court races. And so I just kind of want to let, the listeners understand kind of the special sauce of what we do. And so right now we're on the doors knocking for those state Supreme Court races, trying to educate folks about who's on the ballot, so that they kind of go in, because we all know, I don't care how ingrained you are in politics. Most of us, when we show up and we see those judges on the ballot, we all start to get a little anxious because you're like, oh hell, I didn't even look this person up, because they don't get a lot, they don't get a lot of clout. And so we're, doing the hard work at the doors, talking to folks, but it's not just about that May 19th primary while we're on the doors. When we're hitting those doors, it's really us trying to, stress test our operations. I want to be clear, but then also two, you're trying to get folks who are what we deem to be high opportunity. These are folks that show up infrequently, not at a regular cadence. And we're talking to them and we're saying, hey, this means something to you. So yes, when you're upset in Georgia because we have a 6-week abortion ban, you might want to pay attention to the state Supreme Court races, because these are folks that are going to be, looking at those policies to determine the legality of things going forward. And I think a lot of folks feel like, oh, politics doesn't do anything for me, but it does. It literally touches every facet of our lives. And so that's what we're trying to get people to understand, that we can take the reins. We hold the power.
Yeah. I'm glad you talked about the Supreme Court races, because particularly for issues that matter to our communities, they are making real decisions that will impact our lives. You're also making a good point about paying attention to everything that's on the ballot for your, and like California, you all kind of have a wild governor's race.
Yes.
Maybe we'll do a show on it. But tell us about what is happening with the governor's race in Georgia right now.
So right now, you're absolutely right. It's a wild race on both sides. But on the Dem side, we've got, former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, who is, from all the polling of late, leading the charge. Then you've got Michael Thurmond, who was a one-time, statewide constitutional office holder. I think people consider him, kind of a member of the old guard of Georgia politics. The third one is very interesting. Former lieutenant governor who was a Republican, Jeff Duncan, who has flipped over to the Democratic side. And he's, kind of in the top.
I remember him. Yes.
He's a top 3 right now. Yeah. And then you've got Jason Estevez, who was on the school board, who was a state legislator, state senator. And so you've got these folks who are running. Folks are really, really having some issues with the fact that Duncan is even in the race. And then on the other side, you've got Rick Jackson throwing money at his election or, at his candidacy like manna from heaven. He has an endless pool. He's a billionaire. I don't know if you lived here in Georgia during the Final Four, you saw no less than 100 commercials for Rick Jackson. He is all over the airways, and I really do think he is drowning out all of the other candidates, at least by name recognition now, from all of his spending. So yes, it's going to be an interesting time, but that's going to make it difficult in the general if Rick Jackson, ends up being the nominee. Some people still think, Trump is going to bless Mike Collins and he might be a dark horse. That remains to be seen. But regardless, it's going to be a hard road to hoe on the Democratic side, because money is not flowing as freely for our candidates this cycle as it has in the
Mm-hmm.
past. To your point about 2020, this is not 2020. And Georgia is not the center of the political universe. Georgia is not on
Right.
everyone's map anymore. And so I just really, want to temper, folks thinking, oh, Georgia is blue. Ain't nothing blue about Georgia except those Senate seats. That's it. And
Right.
anybody that lives in Georgia knows that.
Right. Well, so let me ask you about so we don't in California, we don't there's no runoff situation here, right? So
Right.
California has nonpartisan primary, so everybody's in it.
Okay.
And the top two
Right.
go to the general. So tell us if in the event, so if the primary's on May 19th, and on the Democratic side, if it ends up being a runoff, how does that play out? So when would the runoff be, or does that have to be determined? Because that also just feels like more money, more beating each other up, right, heading into the general election in November.
So our runoff dates are baked in. I do not have that runoff date in my mind right now readily available, but it's already baked in. We already have them calendared because we have so many of them. Because in Georgia, the threshold is 50 plus one in order for someone to kind of win the election. And right now, we just don't see anyone getting to that threshold or getting over that threshold. So yeah, it is going to be more money. And so, like I said, if there's no runoff on the other sid, that puts us at a disadvantage on our side, because now we still have a contested race, and the person does, it kind of truncates the calendar and their opportunity to really kind of build name recognition for a statewide run. So, I mean, it would be great if someone could go ahead and prevail and we could hit the ground running, but I just don't see that happening on our side. And so fingers crossed that the GOP has the same issues.
And it's too late, I think. I mean, there's been a lot for the governor's race here in California, there's been a lot of calls for Democrats to drop out, right? So for folks that are not polling very high, there's calls for them to drop out and consolidate around someone, right? Anyone. And is that I mean, have there been calls for that? Is it too late for that at this point?
I don't know whether it's too late, but I'm just going to tell you, I know people think of Southerners as being really nice and hospitable and stuff. We aren't that magnanimous. They ain't going to drop out. Like, I don't care who's calling. Honey, I mean, ego rules the day around here. So these folks are going to stay in there. They have, spent their money, and whatever shakes is what's going to pop, and we're going to have to work with it. The deal is, I don't think... So again, Senator Ossoff is the top of the ticket this cycle. The party has, Georgia has a long, storied history about not formally putting its finger on the scale in any type of primary. So, there might be some machinations kind of working behind the scenes, but nothing outwardly. Because you don't want to piss off the electorate here. Because now one thing about folks in the South, we can show you better than we can tell you anything, because folks will sit home. So,
right. Well, so that's another question that I have for you. So we're sort of like doing insider baseball a little bit here, right? Like this is our jobs. We are paying attention all the time. I guess my question would be, where are voters right now? Right? Like, are people actually paying attention to what's happening? And is there, I mean, for us here in California, I feel like no one was actually paying that much attention to the governor's race. It was not a lot of enthusiasm, not a lot of interest, quite frankly, until the allegations hit with Eric Swalwell. And then it was a little bit like, oh, hey, what is going on, right? Who's in this race? Well, I got to pick somebody, right? And so I'm wondering if that's that same sort of, disinterest might be too strong of a word, but I wonder where voters are, and where Black voters are in particular, when it comes to a primary election that's basically 4 weeks away.
Yes, so there is, I think it's similar to what's kind of going on in California with the electorate. People aren't really paying attention. I mean, they're beginning to wake up now, but honestly, if I can just be completely candid, people are paying attention to Keisha Bottoms' campaign because of her tenure as the Atlanta mayor. It was fraught towards the end. And when she, stopped running for a second term. That left a bad taste in folks' mouths. But particularly what ticked folks off was, when everything was happening around the kind of George Floyd, protests and all of this. And then she, very publicly came out and admonished the Black community here in Georgia, or in Atlanta specifically, in a very public way, using a lot of stereotypes and pejorative framing that people haven't forgotten about. And so I think that's one of the reasons she's not getting across that 50+1 threshold. So yeah, I think for the gubernatorial race, I think people are paying attention to that. They feel conflicted, and they're also concerned about her viability, even if she got through the primary, her viability as a statewide candidate, because it doesn't matter that you were here in Atlanta, honey. Like, people outside of Atlanta don't know you. And I think her campaign is really trying to address that, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is critical, because when we think about Stacey Abrams' runs, right, these were huge campaigns in the midst of huge, right, like, where national attention was being paid.
Yes.
And Stacey started building the infrastructure outside of Atlanta in all 150 whatever counties, right, long before anyone even knew that she was building that infrastructure. So that's and that's, again, the work that needs to be done that people don't often know that is either happening, right, or that it actually has to be done. And I feel like that's sort of the disadvantage. I do think, though, that, even with all of the concerns around Keisha Lance Bottoms, she does remain at the top of the poll, though, right?
She does. But I love that you brought up the point about Stacey. I mean, it's so, I mean, people need to understand that Stacey Abrams did not just spring from the earth and decide to run for governor. That is not what occurred. You're talking about almost a decade work of grassroots organizing, relational organizing, not just from partners, but from apparatuses that she built, that she seeded. That was her going outside of the state and cajoling folks to invest in Georgia. She had a vision of what could be. And then, she put that vision into action. And so you're right. These candidates are benefiting from the infrastructure that was built from all of that hard work and that labor from all of those years, but they don't have the same community trust that she had at that time because of the work in her dues.
Yeah, that's an important point. One other important point about Georgia: Georgia is known for anything other than surprising elections where lots of people who no one thought was going to turn up to vote turned up to vote. It's also known for voter suppression laws. And so when we come forward, I want to talk a little bit about the potential implications of new laws that are going to be implemented in the state. We are going to continue this conversation with Kendra Cotton when we come forward. Stay with us.
More of the Black Pack with Adrianne Shropshire on KBLA Talk 1580 when we come forward.
I'm Amber Payton with BIN News Now. Baton Rouge police have arrested 5 people in connection with the deadly shooting at the Mall of Louisiana. Mayor President Sid Edwards says security video shows a fight between 2 groups in the food court before the gunfire broke out.
Multiple suspects were identified, apprehended, are now in custody.
6 people were shot, 1 later died, and police now say all of the victims were innocent bystanders. Atlanta's Black Mayor Andre Dickens is making a strong push for the city to host the 2028 Democratic National Convention. Dickens welcomed DNC Chair Ken Martin and said Atlanta is the right choice for the country. And Pro Football Hall of Famer Lawrence Taylor, who is Black, is reportedly in the hospital after a medical emergency in New Jersey. TMZ Sports says the 67-year-old was taken to the emergency room Friday, but people close to him do not believe the situation is too serious. Taylor is widely considered one of the greatest defensive players in NFL history. Get BIN News Now on demand 24/7 on the iHeartRadio app.
The Crohn's and Colitis Foundation has been at the forefront of inflammatory bowel disease research and care for over 50 years. Learn more about research, education, and support at crohnscolitisfoundation.org. KBLA.org.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
A classic move by Rams management during day one Thursday night of the NFL draft. Head coach Sean McVay called Matthew Stafford to let him know they were going to select Alabama quarterback Ty Simpson with their first-round pick. After drafting Simpson, McVay told reporters that the Rams are still Stafford's team. Simpson appears to be the Rams quarterback of the future whenever the 38-year-old Stafford decides to retire. The Lakers are in Houston tonight for Game 3. The Lakers have a 2-0 lead in the best-of-7 first-round series. Tonight at 6, it's your Friday night sports fix. Join me and my co-host Neil Scarborough for Out of Bounds. 60 minutes of sports chatter with some black folks flavor. You can hang out with us on the KBLA YouTube channel or hit us up at 1-800-920-1580. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
When the story gets twisted, who's going to tell the truth? When they cut the microphones, who's still talking? When history gets rewritten, who remembers what really happened? We do. KBLA Talk 1580. Black media isn't just important right now, it's essential. Because when mainstream outlets move on, we stay. When the headlines ignore our communities, we don't. When decisions are being made that affect black lives in our schools, our neighborhoods, our economy, KBLA is in the room. This is more than radio. This is a lifeline, a record, a rallying cry. Black stories, black voices, black power.
The heat is on.
On the air and in the culture. KBLA Talk 1580. Stay connected. Stay informed. Stay loud.
Stand up.
You better work.
She's rooted in culture and rising in power. Los Angeles City Council member Karen D. Price Jr. invites you to the District 9 Women's Leadership Summit, a powerful gathering celebrating the women who shape our communities. Join us Sunday, May 3rd from 1 to 6 p.m. Registration is open now, but space is limited. District 9 residents receive special priority. This event is free. Call 323-846-2651 to reserve your spot. That's 323-846-2651. Be rooted, be powerful, be there.
Imagine every pregnant person in LA County having the support they deserve. A doula on every block. Doulas provide emotional, physical, and informational support during pregnancy, through labor, and beyond. Medi-Cal now covers doula care. That means you can get the support you need or train to support families in your community. The LA County Medi-Cal Doula Hub is here to help. Learn more and get started today at ladoulahub.com.
In a world full of noise, one station keeps it real. KBLA Talk 1580, where the conversation goes deeper, the voices sound like yours, and the issues that matter most to our community take center stage. Progressive, powerful, unapologetically us. Whether you're driving through the city or tuning in from your home or office, join the public square. KBLA Talk 1580, your home for talk that enlightens, encourages, and empowers. Listen live on our free KBLA 1580 app, on our website at KBLA1580.com, or on your radio dial at 1580 AM.
Unapologetically progressive. You're inside the Black Pack with Adrianne Shropshire on KBLA Talk 1580.
You are listening to the Black Pack, and we are continuing our conversation with Kendra Cotton from the High Opportunity Voter Project and the High Opportunity Voter Project Action Fund. When you have an administration and a president who sits in the Oval Office apparently every day trying to figure out how to stop people from voting, we are all sort of paying close attention to how the various efforts to both put up barriers to folks voting, as well as just completely, undermining the integrity of elections and causing people to wonder, question the integrity of our elections, whether that's, coming to Fulton County and stealing ballots, or going to anywhere else and stealing ballots, or, saying, hand over your voter rolls or else we'll send ICE, right? Whatever the sort of outrageous idea of the day is. But Georgia did not need Donald Trump to be in office to pass voter suppression laws. And there remain lawsuits, right, against some of the previous voter suppression laws that have been passed. There's lawsuits against you can't give nobody water to stand in line if they've been in line for 700 hours. So talk to us a little bit about what the landscape looks like right now. The purges, right? Georgia's an expert at kicking people off the roll for any unknown reason. But talk to us a little bit, talk to us about the landscape in terms of the voter suppression laws and the potential for additional barriers to be erected to stop people from getting to the polls.
The fight is fixed here. And so, which causes us to have to work 3-4 times as hard just to ensure that, citizens' votes are counted as they should be on a, regular cadence. Here in Georgia, they have gotten very, very, very strategic in that they are, and when I say they, conservative operatives are trying to take over boards of elections. So that they can create the rules, rewrite the rules. That's essentially kind of what manifested when you had the Trump administration, when they, kind of sent Tulsi Gabbard and the FBI down here to commandeer, ballots from to relitigate the 2020 election. It is insane. And people ask, well, how did that occur? It occurred because the decision makers have bought into the big lie. And so here in Georgia, yes, you have entities like the ACLU of Georgia, which is armed and ready for anything that might be thrown in our way, not just to litigate, but to do all of anything that encompasses election protection and voter protection in particular, because we know what we're up against. We know that, even in the Atlanta metro, that we have had folks who do not believe in free and fair elections be nominated to these boards of election, so that they're getting in there kind of mucking around, sowing seeds of discontent and doubt, to create about a problem that does not exist. Then you have a governor who, to your point, and a secretary of state who has been his henchman, despite him, thwarting Trump's efforts to overturn Biden's win in 2020. But regardless, they have no problem, to your point, of purging folks off the rolls. We have a situation where anyone can challenge someone's voter registration. And that's what people don't understand here in Georgia. You can have somebody that makes a mass challenge of 30,000 people based on nothing. And then it is incumbent upon the voter to have to go and prove that they are, in fact, a valid voter. That's insane to me. We have people who GOP operatives, who are legitimately sitting at home right now, kind of going through and saying, oh, gosh, this guy, he was in Arizona for a month. Not, mind you, looking on social media, mind you, this person was in Arizona caring for a sick mother. A sick mother comes back home. Now you've been challenged, and you don't find out about the challenge. If you missed that postcard in the mail, you don't find out about it until you actually go to exercise your right to vote, and they give you a provisional ballot. That is not democracy, but that's what we contend with on a daily basis.
Right, and I think that's we certainly hear about this in Georgia and in other places, but I think it is that example that you just gave that makes it real for people to understand how absurd it is, how random it is, right? And how it is, these laws are being weaponized by people who are just bad actors, who just decide that you shouldn't be allowed to vote. How are groups engaging with voters and communities to make sure that folks are aware? How are groups engaging, and are there partners beyond the legal groups, right? The ACLU Advancement Project and others. Are there other partners that are being engaged? Are there faith partners being engaged to make sure that their congregations are aware of what they need to do to make sure they're on the rolls and that their votes get counted?
Yes, I think all of the above, particularly the faith community. Now, the one thing I will give the Trump administration credit for in this time is the fact that they kind of released the handcuffs from the faith community with regard to partisanship and actually being able to participate. I mean, I think they thought it was just going to be for, white evangelical Christians, but hey, Black folks are like, hey, we here. We ready to participate too. And so when you talk about those groups, it's not just, souls to the polls and going out voting, but yes, we are trying to encourage particularly retired and elderly citizens, please volunteer on election day to be poll watchers, because what they're trying to do is intimidate people, right? So when the administration says, oh, ICE is going to be at the polls, they're trying to intimidate. When they're saying, oh, we're going to send the National Guard, they're trying to intimidate. And so, yes, there are a litany of groups, particularly our C3 groups, which are under the umbrella of Pro Georgia, which is our C3 table. They are all, talking about election protection, what they need to do, trying to, coordinate volunteers that are going to be out and about. Usually how it works, Adrianne, is that on election day, you have like an election protection hub here in the state, and people call in to that hub, and we deploy resources out. And it's a lot of gamesmanship, because election protection also includes, you guys, when they change your polling place the day of the election. You've been voting there for 40 years. And then the day of the election, you show up and there's a piece of paper on the door and the school is locked. And you're like, oh my gosh, where do I go? And so we help out with things like that. It's legitimately a death by 1,000 cuts here in Georgia. And so we have to get very adept of kind of, maneuvering away from all of the various minefields.
Yeah. And is it your sense that folks are, because this has happened so often in the last, several years, that voters are aware of the shenanigans, that they know that there are things that they're gonna have to do? Are people that individually sort of prepared? Certainly the organizations are getting prepared and getting ready. Are folks like, okay, it's election time is coming, I need to check all the things and, get ready?
We all in the South, to varying degrees, walk around in a state of collective PTSD because we are under constant threat when it comes to trying to exercise our rights to vote. So yes, there's an old saying, I got my backup, I'm ready. We walk into elections with your backup because you're just, that it's not as seamless as it should be in a normative sense. I know, despite me being in this work, I check my voter registration every month. If that's not PTSD, I don't know what is. Who else is out here doing stuff like that? Because you can be purged. So when you ask about, the electorate, I think they do know. I have children two Georgia voters, one is 21, one is 18 this year, and I have taught them out of my own check and verify what you're doing. And I hope that's something that they carry with them going forward, because I don't think any of this is going to stop. They're always trying to, the goal is not to have electoral expansion. They don't want everyone who's eligible to vote. And so they're trying to figure out how to, kind of trim the margins, while we simultaneously we're out here trying to figure out how to expand the margins.
Trying to push the envelope.
Yes. So that's a constant conflict.
When we come forward, I want to talk to you a little bit about this back and forth. And some of it is the back and forth about how candidates are appealing to voters as well. I want to go back to the candidate conversation here in a minute. Okay. But when we come forward, we're going to pick up that conversation with Kinder Cotton. Stay with us.
You're part of the Black Pack with Adrianne Shropshire on KBLA Talk 1580.
My name is Cynthia Mitchell. I've been an emergency room nurse in Los Angeles County for 25 years. I've been there through every fire season, every outbreak, every earthquake. Every time Los Angeles needed us, the doctors and nurses of Los Angeles County showed up. And right now, I'm seeing another disaster coming. Trump's cuts to Los Angeles County's healthcare system are a public health crisis in the making. Medi-Cal, public hospitals, disaster preparedness are all at risk. But we can stop it. Measure ER fights back against these cuts. For a half a penny, we keep emergency rooms open, care within reach for working families, and doctors and nurses serving the communities we love. When you vote yes on Measure ER, you're not just voting for health care, you're voting for LA. Vote yes on Measure ER by June 2nd.
Ad paid for by Yes on ER, Restore Healthcare for Angelenos, sponsored by St. John's Community Health and Health Justice Action Fund. Ad committee top funder, St. John's Community Health.
When temperatures climb, LADWP wants to help you stay cool indoors, starting in your attic. With quality attic insulation, your home can stay more comfortable during hot summer days and help lower your energy bills year-round. It's a smart way to save. And for a limited time, LADWP has increased the attic insulation rebates to make upgrading more affordable. Act now to start saving. Visit ladwp.com/attic. That's ladwp.com/attic.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580, connecting you with services and solutions. These are hard times for housing in America. Too many in our community face barriers to safe housing, behavioral health care, and affirming spaces for healing, particularly those impacted by poverty and stigma or incarceration. Rooted in South LA, AMAD supports impacted communities through housing, wellness, and leadership development. AMAD provides culturally responsive, peer-led support from transitional housing and mental health services to leadership development and youth empowerment. They offer safe, affirming houses for youth, transgender women, and formerly incarcerated individuals. Therapy and peer support with a focus on healing trauma in Black communities. HIV prevention and care, free testing, education, and wraparound services for whole person wellness. Standing in the gap with health, housing, and hope. Reach out to Ahmad Institute at 323-569-1610. That's 323-569-1610. Or visit amaad.org. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Let's get back to more of the Black Pack with Adrianne Shropshire right now on KBLA Talk 1580.
You are listening to the Black Pack, and we are continuing our conversation with Kendra Cotton, the CEO of High Opportunity Voter Project and High Opportunity Voter Project Action Fund in Georgia, are doing the work right now to educate and mobilize voters in Georgia, both for the primary that's coming up on May 19th, but obviously for the November general election, where they have several significant and high-profile races, starting with Jon Ossoff's re-election in the Senate, for the United States Senate. They have, like in California, they have a high-profile governor's race and then a state Supreme Court race that will be critical for the people of Georgia. Kendra, I wanted to talk a little bit about how candidates are talking to voters and what they're talking to voters about. We've seen at the national level this kind of battle, really, inside the Democratic Party, sort of post-Trump's election, that is essentially folks who, white folks, I will say largely, right, who are in this conversation with each other about whether or not the party should continue to appeal, frankly, to its base, right? To Black voters, to young voters, to women, right? Should the party continue to sort of make appeals to mobilize those voters at scale, or if they should pivot to what they see as voters they've lost really since the Obama years, right? And before that, actually, right? Since LBJ, quite frankly. But voters that they've lost that are largely white voters who they think that they need to appeal to come back into the Democratic fold. Now, I personally don't want to be in the Democratic fold with actual racists and bigots that they are appealing to come back. Right, bring back the MAGA people is not really where I'm interested in being. But that is sort of raised this debate about, like, so what issues are we focused on? How are we talking about those issues? How that's shaping up in Georgia?
Adrianne, that ain't nothing but MAGA by another name. I think the party and those that are, kind of, waxing nostalgic about what used to be, that party is dead. It's dead. Right. You dance with the girl, you dance with who brought you. And who brought you
Right.
here are Black and brown people, are women, are, the LGBTQ community. And it's a
Right.
slap in the face to even be pontificating openly about whether or not, that was great and we appreciate y'all, but we really want to get back to our bread and butter constituency. Because to your point, we have moved beyond that. We ain't going back to that. When we shun MAGA, we mean that there is no Make America Great Again in that capacity. Because for whom? Because it wasn't great for us when the Dixiecrats were in office. That wasn't great. And so it's just like, what are we doing with that conversation? And to be real, we need to be honest about why they're having that conversation. It's the fact that they are being challenged by their allegiances to the dollars that they are bringing in. We need to talk about that. They're being challenged by a younger electorate right now about the alliance and allegiance to AIPAC and AIPAC spending. And instead of having a constructive conversation about that, you want to say, oh, let's quiet the noise. Let's cordon these folks off. And then let's just kind of go ahead and do business as usual. That dog ain't gonna hunt in 2026.
Right. Yeah, there's always this sort of tendency to be like, well, let's not talk about anything that isn't about the economy, right? Because then that's uncomfortable. That's uncomfortable for us and the people we're trying to bring in. So let's not talk about that. But I know that when we've been talking to voters across the country, right, folks care about the economy, obviously, right? Everyone is sort of weighed down by costs. Everyone is worried, right, about the ability to provide for their families. Obviously, with the war, people are concerned about gas and also
crisis.
like, like, am I gonna, are we in danger, right? So people are worried about the economy for sure. People have lost their jobs. The unemployment for Black folks is high,
astronomical.
But Black voters in particular, that's not their only issue.
No.
Right? Folks are concerned about a whole range of issues that have to do with the erosion of rights that we've seen in this country, that have to do with the erasure of Black history, that have to do with the very clear attempt to undermine our voting rights at the federal level as well as at the state level. People are concerned about what is, clearly the mainstreaming of white supremacy and white supremacists, right? They expect the candidates that are coming for their vote to talk about how they're going to make the economy better, to talk about how they're going to help to make sure that there's opportunity for everyone. But they also expect them to be talking about those issues. And so I think that's the balance. And I'm wondering how candidates are doing on that front. So I think about you all's former lieutenant governor, who's now was a Republican and is now a Democrat. How is he talking about issues that he would have never had to talk about running as a Republican? And I don't want to focus on him, but how are the candidates in general in the governor's race as well as Senator Ossoff? How are they doing on that account?
In the gubernatorial side, I'm just going to be quite frank. They're all missing the mark. So it's not just Duncan; it's all of them. No one is speaking, to what is really occurring in the Black community with regard to the retrenchment of diversity, equity, inclusion. You have whole industries now rolling back internships just because, they had, something that was specific for Black males or something that was specific for a Black female. And then it's also, you feel betrayed. And none of the candidates are speaking to the fact that the willingness of other seemingly, marginalized groups, Asian Americans in particular, in lending their name and face to this litigation to roll back a lot of this stuff. And you're just like, wait a minute, you have what you have off my back. And now you're going to turn around and say, but because of the racial hierarchy here in America with whites on the top and Blacks on the bottom and everybody jockeying for position in between, because we know as Black people, we're always going to be at the bottom, you start to get a bad taste in your mouth when all these people try to step on you, because you're like, wait a minute, I'm down here toiling because if you will just do right by us, a rising tide lifts all boats. So if you're helping here, so healthcare, when you're talking about, like I said, educational opportunities, affordable housing, these are all the things that people want to hear. And our candidates are not speaking to that. We also need to talk about these doggone data centers.
So as we've been doing focus groups around the country, Georgia was the one place where people were like, unprompted, like, yeah, can we talk about these data centers? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yes, because the data centers are driving up everybody's electricity costs. Because the way Georgia works is businesses don't pay a penny for jack. They put everything off on the citizen. And so then you have scarce resources, whether it's energy, whether it's water. And so these data centers are just sucking everything up. And then folks that are living in the community are having to go without. And then there's collusion with, like, that's why the public service commissioner races here were so important that we won last year, because they help regulate those industries so that people aren't seeing 300% increases in their electric bills trying to support and sustain a data center that's going to displace them economically when all of this AI takes over their jobs. So you want me to pay for the privilege of being unemployed? Make that make sense to me.
Because that doesn't make sense. But yes, I think that it's those sorts of things that are specific to some states. And then there's the overarching things that are, that matter to everyone that people expect to hear from the candidates that are running. How are you going to address those issues? And that's for Black voters, whether it's in California or it's in Mississippi or in Michigan, right? Or whether it is in Georgia or North Carolina. People expect those candidates to be talking about these issues because when we think about what's happening in the country, right, there's a reason why we see a mainstreaming of white supremacy. I mean, the lawsuit that we just saw against SPLC is frankly about, suing SPLC literally for taking down the Klan. This is another show. I'm not gonna do that right now. But like, this is people want, Black folks in particular need for anyone who's going to be in elected office to address what they're going to do about these broader social issues.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right, and I know the SPLC is on for another show, but it really ticks me off that the administration is moving in the way that it's moving, because I'm like, so can the government go back and sue itself? Because the SPLC is simply using the tactics of COINTELPRO. That's all they're doing. It's the same tactics, but the government weaponized those tactics to tear down Black-led organizations that were power building. SPLC is trying to tear down these white supremacist entities that are doing real harm to regular citizens, and yet the government chooses to side with the Klan and the Nazis.
So, Kendra, we have a long way to go to November. We have not so far to go to May 19th, which is when your primary is. I think I'm going to be calling on you to come and give us updates on what is happening in the state of Georgia as we sort of move through this process of getting to, Election Day, November, for the control of the United States Congress. So, and also governors. But I appreciate you coming on and taking the time to sort of talk to us about what's happening. We want to keep our eye on what's happening across the country, and particularly with organizations that are helping to do the work to mobilize Black voters. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
And thanks to you all for joining me once again on a Friday afternoon. This is the Black Pack. We will be back next Friday, 4 to 6 p.m. right here on KBLA Talk 1580. Have a great week.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Amber Payton with BIN News Now. Baton Rouge police have arrested 5 people in connection with the deadly shooting at the Mall of Louisiana. Mayor President Sid Edwards says security video shows a fight between 2 groups in the food court before the gunfire broke out.
Multiple suspects were identified, apprehended, are now in custody.
6 people were shot. 1 later died in